Here's a psychological breakdown of The Black Phone, The Grabber. The movie's not just about kidnapping. It's ultimately about power and control from the grabber to his victims, which is all these kids. It also introduces trauma cycles, psychological manipulation, and learned helplessness versus resistance. If you don't know what helplessness means, it means essentially that you have no reason to go on. There's so much bad things happening that you're just like, well, it is what it is. I'm prepared to die. I'm prepared for whatever bad scenario to happen. You see this a lot in domestic violence relationships as well. The grabber is not just evil. He's literally performing a pattern behavioral system based on power and control. That's his ultimate dynamic. Now we're going to get into a couple other dynamics, and I have my notes right here. But power and control is the biggest motivation, as it is for most criminals in whatever setting. The basement is a big one because it creates a controlled environment for himself. It removes autonomy from victims. He has set rules. They're not allowed to touch the phone. They're not allowed to go upstairs. So he's super controlling. He wants that control over them. And it also goes into ritualistic behavior. So with the mask, the creepy ass mask, he looks at everything as a game. He displays a repeated pattern of abduction with these children. There's been multiple children that have been missing, and it ultimately shows a fantasy driven behavior. The mask, the balloons, shoving the kids in there, bringing them down to the basement, and then essentially, I don't want to say like torturing, but like low key, but controlling what they're doing. It's for his own fantasy. And you already know that he rehearsed the scenarios with the balloons anyway. He brings it to every single child, so it's not like we have to beat that with a dead horse. But with the victim selection too, this goes into victimology. I've talked about it before. He targets young boys that are vulnerable and accessible. So if I'm remembering correctly from the first movie, when but one of the boys, like the main character, was taken, he was alone by himself walking home from school. And that's how most of the victims were abducted. They were by themselves and accessible. So the grabber took the opportunity to what was already there. So he had specific victim preference. All of the kids were males, and it was possibly tied to personal history or identity fixation. I don't remember exactly why they said he was doing what they did, if the movie even said, but obviously there's a fixation there. Why not take girls? Why not take older women? Why not take older men? You're only taking little boys. Then it goes into psychological manipulation or the game. He doesn't just harm them, he's testing them. Like, I remember the part when the kid was downstairs and on the phone, the other kids are like, don't go upstairs, the door, because the door was open. It's a trap. And the kid's like, what the hell? And then the video, like the camera goes upstairs and he's sitting there in front of the door. So he would have gotten his ass beat if he would have gone upstairs. So now the grabber's like, you're pissing me off because you're not playing these little mind games that I want you to play. He creates false hope. He leaves the doors open. He's watching your behavior, and he just wants participation rather than like an interaction between the two. So he's got a dual personality presentation. Again, the mask, it differentiates from the emotional states that he's in. I'm sorry, I cannot talk. Which is calm and friendly sometimes, and then on the other hand, you're aggressive and threatening. This could indicate some compartmentalization, identity fragmentation, which means that you don't have a full grasp on your identity. You can be, yes, like cool with some people and not cool with the other, but ultimately as your person, you do not have a good handle on your emotions. You're obviously here and there, and it can just be intentional intimidation tactics, but I would lean more so the identity fragmentation, just because he's really getting into that fantasy. You understand? The way that trauma theory is brought into this, early experience trauma, lack of control in their own childhood, can recreate scenarios where they have control. Now, this is looking at it from the grabber's POV. Again, I don't know what his background was, if they even touched on that, but a lot of people who end up being criminals actually have been the victim in something somewhere in their past history. I've talked about this before, where people who have been sexually assaulted turn hypersexual. I myself have. I've talked about it. I'm very open about it. To gain control back over their body. They're the ones in control. So for him, I don't know what happened to him, if he was sexually abused as a child, if he was beat as a child, if he was raised around narcissistic people. So it was mind games all the time. And to where he's trying to take back control over these children. Obviously, it's bad, okay? But that's essentially what he's trying to do. It goes into the cycle of violence theory and power restoration behavior. People also want to say, oh, he's a psychopath, but we don't know that because he does show traits that are consistent with psychopathy, like the power and control offenders and ritualistic behaviors. But they're just not 100% there to say in the movie that, like, yeah, he's a psychopath, which is scary because for real, that's how the real life like works. Just because you're doing this doesn't necessarily mean you're a psychopath. You are just on one, like, for lack of a better term. And it's just, isn't that kind of creepy? Because people want to label so fast, like, they're a psychopath because they would do this, to know that they're not. What the hell? And something interesting psychologically about this case is Finn, the kid that I keep talking about, he adapted rather than submitted to the grabber. Finn got to use the victim's past knowledge. He started to get helpless and then was like, hell no. And he started fighting back strategically. So the grabber wasn't just kidnapping kids. He was literally running a psychological experiment on control for his own benefit.